Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Ann Yu Kyung Choi, and it is my absolute pleasure to share the making of Once Upon an Hour, my debut children's picture book. To begin, we will have some greetings from the Consulate General.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this special seminar on Korean literature and the Korean Canadian narrative. I am so pleased to co-host this seminar with the Korean Canadian Writers Association. Thank you for your interest and participation in today's event. This event is organized as part of our 2021 Korea Week Festival. In early November, Korean Consulate would like to introduce Korean literature to Canadians. Korean literature has developed a lot since ancient times. Famous poetry and novel writers are active in Korea, and there are many famous literature works in Korea. It is developing even more in modern times. Nevertheless, Korean literature is not known worldwide compared to K-pop or K-drama. Just as you can see that the Squid Game, which has recently broken Netflix's world number one viewing record, is famous. Korea is a cultural powerhouse. The reason why Korean movies and dramas are so popular around the world is that Korean literature is doing its part as the origin. Today, we will be very interested to introduce Korean literature to Canadians, focusing on An Yu-kyung, whose own fairy tale book, Once Upon an Hour. It will also be very interesting to find out how the stories of Korean Canadian writers growing up as immigrants in Canada are reflected in literary works. I would like to thank An Yu-kyung Choi, who will present at the seminar today, and I would like to express my deep gratitude to Sung-chul Hwang, President of KCWA. Through this seminar, I hope that participants will learn about the excellence of Korean literature. Thank you.
And again, a special thank you from the Consul General of the Republic of Korea, who is hosting this event. And a big, big thanks to the Korean Canadian Writers Association for organizing this. And a especially big, big thank you to the chair, Chair Hong, and to Mr. Junho Lee, who has been very diligent and very, very patient in helping me get to where I am here today. Thank you. So, I wanted to just begin with a quick fun activity. For those of you who are not Korean, I wanted to teach you three key Korean words that are kind of central to the story I wanted to share. So, in Korean, we say for hi, it's 안녕, right? So, again, for my non-Korean speaking guests, again, you can just say 안녕. And we say that for hi and bye, so it's super easy. And then a very, very special word for me is harmony, which means grandmother in Korean. So I think about harmony and melody, and harmony is such a beautiful, beautiful word. And I have very, very fond memories of my grandmother, my great grandmother, growing up. And part of the story I'm telling was to honor them. So harmony. And then toraji. Toraji is a plant, a wild plant that grows in Korea, and it is known for its medicinal remedies. So toraji. So again, three keywords. I wanted to share a bit of background information on how this story came to be. So in 2016, I had just published a novel, and my agent asked me, would I be interested in writing a children's book? And I hadn't really thought about that. But a part of me, there was an event that happened when my daughter was about 3 years old, and that was when and I've shared this story before. I was in chapters with her, and this woman came up, this white woman came up and asked my daughter, what's your name? And my daughter said her name is Yuri because at that point that's the name she went by. That is her Korean name. And the woman said, well, I guess you'll never see that name in any of the books here. And that was deeply upsetting, right, for me, because it hit me in that moment that this woman who had not intended to be cruel had shared something that was true. And so, and then even my own experiences of coming to Canada, and again, as many of you know, it was the policy in 1975 that in order for new Canadians to be adopted into a Canadian school, one had to take a Canadian friendly name. And that's how I was given the name Anne. So I had all of this in my thoughts, and I thought, you know what, it would be so cool for my daughter to see her Korean name in a children's book, right? So then I thought, okay, I was very committed to writing this children's book. Mind you, by then, like my daughter now is 22 years old, and I wrote about all of this for a Toronto Star article. I was made to anglicize my name as a child, and here's why I'm finally putting a Korean name on my book cover. So again, it's been a lot of exploring for me, just in terms of my own identity. And beyond that, I really wanted to make sure that today's generation of young people and newcomers have a different experience. So one of my happiest and proudest moments is, and again, you're looking at the cover of Once Upon an Hour. It does have my full Korean name, and Yu Kyung Choi. And I was delighted that the Festival of Literary Diversity chose it as their picture book of the month. And not only that, I had Korean illustrator, which was again super incredible for me, and I'll speak more to that later. So my agent again asked me, okay, do you want to write a children's book? And so in December 2016, I had the first draft of my children's book. And again, at that point, it's my agent's job to then sell the manuscript to publishers. So it was a bit of a bumpy road. The manuscript is short, and again, writing a children's book I found was very difficult. You have 1,000 words to convey a complete story. Um, Part of the challenge that we went through in terms of trying to sell this to a publisher was, while we had some very excited editors that were interested in bringing the manuscript to life, ultimately what happens is, so there's a manuscript, and an editor will champion that manuscript in a publishing house. We'll take it to an editorial board meeting, and then they will talk about it. And one of the key components is the marketing department has to figure out, how are we going to market and sell the book? And that's where we ran into some challenges. Um, and again, for those of you who may not know, in order to publish a book, you send the manuscript traditionally to one publisher at a time. So it's not like, you have a manuscript and you could send it to 100 different publishers at the same time. That for traditional publishing, that's not the case. You have to send the manuscript, right, to one publisher at a time. And so there were countless times where I got very, very excited, right? Because I had the editors that were excited about it. But ultimately, the marketing department had a difficult time trying to sell the story. Had a Korean main character. It was set in Korea, and they didn't know, is it a fairy tale? Is it a fable? They just didn't know how to situate it. Some of the feedback I got along the road was, and this is like, this was 2016 at the time, right? 2016, is that, you know what? Hmm, we don't know if a grandmother in Saskatchewan would walk into a bookstore and buy this book for her grandchild. So sorry, we can't publish it. So that was kind of very difficult in trying for me to process because again, I thought at that point here we are committed to telling diverse stories and this whole idea of supporting and building inclusion. But again, part of the harsh realities of publishing is ultimately one wants to sell books. I ended up finally signing with Orca Books, and Orca Books is an independent Canadian publishers, and I am absolutely grateful to them because they accepted the manuscript the way it was. I also did have other interested publishers, but they wanted to change the story. I think some kind of wanted to Canadianize that, whatever that may be. But I found a publisher, my agent found a publisher that really understood the essence of the story that I was trying to tell, and which was really, truly, I wanted to have a Korean protagonist. I wanted it to be set in Korea because, again, I wanted young readers here to explore, Korean stories. So I ended up signing the contract in 2018. And one of the things that I really truly wanted was I wanted a Korean illustrator. I have seen so many picture books where, again, as a Korean person, when I see another Korean person, I know they're a Korean person. I think the Asian culture and the Asian people, we're very, very, very diverse. And one of the things I truly wanted was for my Korean protagonist to have Korean features. I also wanted the animal characters depicted in the book to be represented as Korean characters. So one of the requests that I made was please find a Korean Canadian illustrator. And again, Orca came through. They found a Toronto-based illustrator, and she was fabulous. So from the time that I signed the contract to the time the book was released, and the book is only 32 pages, it took 2 years. But again, I'm just grateful that it happened, and I am delighted to share that it was one of CBC's anticipated children's book of 2020, 49th Shelf, which is again a website dedicated to books and publishers also included in their fall releases. So in the end, that worked, and I was happy with that. It again, it for me seeing my books on bookshelves in stores, it's really goes beyond me. It really is about celebrating the Korean culture. It's about increasing visibility to the Korean culture within Canada, and it's really, really trying to give the message to young people that your culture, your heritage is important, and that I really, again, as an educator, as a mother, as a writer, it's important that that representation is there. So here's a fun interactive activity. See, this is the educator in me. So at this point, these are the 12 animals that are featured in Once Upon an Hour. I invite you to quickly try to identify the 12 animals. So if you look very closely on the screen, okay, some of the animals are obvious and some of them may be trickier to find. So I'll give you few seconds to figure out. And again, oh, so at this point, I'm going to invite you. There's a chat feature. Please, please start putting in any animals that you see in the chat. So again, there's a chat feature. So yes. Sean, okay, I see a pig, I see a tiger. What other animals do you see? There should be 12. Oh, somebody's, okay, snake, yes. Oh, the monkey. And the monkey's important because I'm a monkey. I was born in the year of the monkey. Excellent. Awesome. And throughout the whole presentation, if anyone has questions for me, please feel free to put it into the chat box. I'm happy to answer. Okay. And now I'm just going to move to the next slide, which, okay, so here's all the animals. And again, these are the animals of the Korean zodiac. So just like you know, there's the year of the tiger, there's the year of the dog, there's the year of the horse. The Koreans also break things down to the hour. And I remember, like, I think it was my Takori harmony who used to talk about, you know, let's get together during the hour of the dog. And that's how I was first introduced to the concept. One of the things when you're writing a children's book is beyond a story. What other things can young readers take away? And so one of the things that I looked at was time. So here, again, you could put things into the chat box. Okay, so true or false, you can use your fingers and your hands to tell what time it is. So true or false, again, please put it into the chat box. Okay, yes, it's true. Okay, because actually, if you look it up, you could actually put your hand against the horizon, and you could actually use your fingers to tell time. You can use the sun's position in the sky to tell time, and I think most of us know that. You could even use shadows to tell times because shadows grow long or short depending on the time. And even the stars can help you tell time. And again, we know that's true. And again, there's different ways to measure time. And this was, again, one of the key messages I wanted young readers to have is that yes, while we look at, you know, our wristwatches. Actually, no, not anymore. We look at our cell phones. We look at our cell phones to tell time. But again, I really wanted young readers to realize that there are many different ways of telling time. So on that note, one of the key questions for this was, but how do you know what is bedtime? So at this point, I'd like to share my story with you. So, time for bed, said Mother. Yuri looked at the clock. Although she could count sheep, the hands and numbers on the clock's face puzzled her. How do you know? She asked. Mother thought for a moment. When I was your age, I had trouble telling time too. Your great-grandmother, my harmony, told me a story about a special group of animals and a compassionate mountain that used the sun and the moon to tell time. Maybe that story will help you too. As the mist rose with the morning sun, a child struggled up a steep trail in search of toraji, a plant that grew deep in the mountains. The child's mother was ill, and the root of the plant could be brewed to make a special healing tea. Mountain, who was wise and kind, took pity on the child and asked the animals of the morning to help the child find the toraji plant. The animals shook their head. They had other things to do. When the sun rises, it's time for me to chase the moon away. Rabbit disappeared into the dawn. When the sun peeks over the eastern horizon, it's time for me to greet its warmth. Dragon flew off into the clouds. When the sun climbs the sky, I need to bask in its bright rays. Snake rested on a rock to daydream. Hopeful, Mountain turned to the animals of the afternoon for help. The animals ignored the child, who on tiptoes picked some berries to eat before climbing higher. When the sun shines high above the birds, it's time for me to exercise my legs. Horse trotted down a worn path. When the afternoon sun starts to tilt, it's time for me to graze. Sheep nibbled on red clover and sweet grass. When clouds cloak the tree tops, it's time for me to find my supper. Monkey leaped from branch to branch, plucking persimmons. The child yawned, took a short nap, and climbed higher still. Saddened, Mountain asked the animals of the evening for help. The animals sighed. When the sun moves west and shadows grow long, it's time for me to nest. Chicken pecked at the soil around her. When the sun has gone down and the skies are purple, it's time for me to stand guard. Ears alert, dog sniffed the air. When moonlight sparkles over waterfalls, it's time for me to dream. Pig yawned and went back to sleep. In the fading light, the child stumbled and fell down the mountainside, crashing into a tree. Concerned, Mountain, who could do nothing, turned to the animals of the night for help. The animals darted away. When the sky brightens with starlight, it's time for me to hunt. Mouse hummed a tune and searched for food. When the river shimmers with moonbeams, it's time for me to close my eyes. Cow sank into a deep sleep. When the moon gets ready to slumber, it's time for me to stretch my muscles. Tiger pounced in pursuit of a shooting star. As Cow snored gently, the child sat up and began to sing a song, a sweet, sad song. I walk over the path when Toraji flowers bloom. Mountain's heart also ached with sadness. Tears flowed and turned into snow. The cold tickled Rabbit's ears. Rabbit looked up and saw the distressed child. As the sun rose in the east, Rabbit's thumping feet brought the animals of the morning into action. We can help, they said. Rabbit collected wood for a fire. Dragon found the very best toraji as Snake scooped them into a sack. The child's sweet song wove through the sun's midday rays. The animals of the afternoon heard it as news of the child's troubles traveled. We can help, they said. Horse carried the sack of toraji. Sheep made a warm blanket out of wool. Monkey picked the ripest persimmons to feed the child. The song floated in and around the clouds as the dimming sunlight turned to twilight. The animals of the evening heard it next. We can help, they said. Chicken laid an egg for the child and cooked it over a fire. Dog watched the child as the shadows grew long. Pig told magical tales of flying pigs found only in dreams. As the moonlight became starlight, the animals of the night heard the song. We can help, they said Mouse, and Mouse sang a lullaby. Cow carried the sleeping child on her back. Tiger protected them during the long journey until the child was safely home, and Mother was able to drink her special tea. At last, Mountain was pleased. In appreciation of their fine efforts, Mountain offered the animals the gift of time, divided into the hours in which they had each helped a child in need. I'll bet the animals can help me tell time, said Judy. She drew a large circle on a piece of paper and divided it into sections. Carefully, she sketched each animal until her clock was complete. It's the hour of the dog, said Mother, tucking Yuri in. Bedtime, said Judy as she drifted off into a dream of a wise mountain and its kind-hearted animals. I wanted to share, again, I shared that it was a Korean translator, a Korean illustrator. Her name is Soyeon Kim, and she is an award-winning Korean-born artist and educator currently living in Toronto, Ontario. And she received a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Visual Arts and a Bachelor of Education from York University. And I invite you to check out her website. She is remarkable. She is, and I just have to share some background scenes. So what William is, she handmade everything that you saw as illustrations. So if you look here, at the very beginning, where Yuri is in bed with the mom, there's a little bookcase. So she actually designed each of these little things. And then all the animals that you saw in the book, there they are, they're in her hands. So what she did was she created dioramas. And again, if you look very closely, everything is three-dimensional. And what she did was the background, she would change the background. So if it was a night scene, you would have a night background. If it's a day, it would. So again, everything would change depending on the scene. And then basically, oh my gosh, so this is photographer Michael Cullen, and here's Soyeon again. So that each page was photographed. And that's why, by photographing each scene, you get shadows, right? And everything, you get lighting that way. So the amount of work that went into creating the illustrations for this book are extraordinary. And here again, it's just another shot. So the other thing too is if anyone is interested in creating their own or writing their own children's book, so an illustrator works independently of the writer. So for example, I didn't choose my illustrator. What happens in traditional publishing houses is if you are a new writer, they will match you with a very experienced illustrator. And so when you're doing marketing and advertising and promoting of the book, you would then use the illustrator who has a lot of experience and has a lot of fans, and vice versa. If you have a new writer, then you would again the reverse, right? So that there's always an experienced partner as a part of the project. And again, they work independently. So I had this manuscript and then I gave it to the publisher. And then the illustrator went off and worked on the project for I think about 6 months. And while the illustrator was working on it, I didn't know what she was doing. Because again, I think it's very, very important. And again, it's different projects and different expectations, but traditionally, the illustrator will go ahead and create everything. And again, I was grateful that I had a Korean Canadian illustrator because in my writer notes, I really wanted to convey that For example, dragons, right? In Western tradition, our dragons tend to be fierce. Like you think of Games of Thrones and there's like spitting fire and they're fierce, whereas Korean dragons are not. They're gentle creatures. They're often associated with water and they're smaller, right? They have whiskers, right? And so again, I really wanted to ensure that the characters were as authentic as possible. And again, because Orca very intentionally partnered me with a Korean Canadian illustrator, I was able to um, I was able to express that in a way she understood. And I understand from speaking with the illustrator as well that she did a lot of research, right, into just the animals themselves. How can we make them fit the story? And then when she was almost done, we were able to connect, and I was invited actually to see the sets, and I was there for one of the photo shoots. That was quite exciting. But again, the artist works independently of the author. Okay, so before we go on, I just wanted to get encouraged. If you have questions, I'm going to see where the chat box is. If you have questions, please feel free to put questions into the chat box because I also did want to share an amazing resource with you. So what you're looking at is since I penned this in 2016, so much has changed. And Linda Sue Park is a remarkable American, Korean American author, and I have long admired her work. She put together this incredible resource, um, and I just wanted to share that with you. So I wanted to share this resource with you before I continue, and it's lindasuepark.com. And what Linda has done is she has invited Korean American, Korean Canadian, anybody of Korean heritage to share our work. And so I wanted to just really share this with you. So if there's a section called, okay, I'm gonna Okay. So it's kids' books by Korean American and Korean diaspora. And again, we are spotlighting Korea. If I don't know, okay, if, I'm not sure if people are aware that Ontario celebrates Korean Heritage Month in the month of October. So this is, I guess, kind of dovetailing on that. There are so many wonderful Korean Canadian, Korean American books out there, and this is an amazing resource. I just wanted to share some of the highlights because it wasn't until Linda invited me to be part of this project that I realized that, wow, there's so much out there, but do people know? And how do we share information and how do we get this to everyone? So there is a section on picture books. Okay. And this is one of my most favorite books. It's called The Name Jar. Some of you may have read it. Okay. So again, these are picture books, and all picture books are they follow a very specific formula. It's 32 pages, and if you look at it, they cover such incredible topics. If there's any educators out there, again, the Korean alphabet Hangul, right, was created, was commissioned by a king to create that. And again, so that common, because before the Korean language, we used Chinese. But the legend goes, or the story is that the king wanted to create a language that was accessible to commoners. And so again, the story can be shared. So there is so much out there that, again, Until I was made aware of this website, I just did not know. And those are the picture books. There's middle age, middle grades. Again, if you have children or you're an educator, please check out this website. And again, there will be a book that's appropriate. If anyone's wondering why tigers are such a common thing that pops up, the Korea loves tigers and it's a big, big symbol. And this is Linda right there. And then this is young adults. And actually, this is my book right here. This is my novel, which I'm super happy to share that it's actually now being studied in schools, in high schools, and post-secondary schools. But again, if you have young people out there, I was told Almost American Girl is an excellent book. If anyone has read it, if you could let me know in the chat box. Oh, and I have to give a huge shout out. If you have a pen and paper, please write down The Silence of the Bones by June Her. It is excellent. It and it again is looking at um, the Chosen Dynasty. It's actually, if you look here, beyond the rigorous research, culturally specific narrative details, The Silence of the Bones is an exhilarating thriller, pitting the powerful against the power hungry, endowing the powerless with affecting agency. But again, please check that book out. Banned Book Club. That seems interesting. I have not read that. But again, if you look at this, right, there's just amazing, amazing books out there. The Rebel Soul in Korea. Okay, so there are lots and lots of books. So please, again, I invite you to check out the website. And I have to also share because I loved the name jar so much. When I walked into chapters and saw Once Upon an Hour next to it, because both are last names are Choi, it made me very happy. So I had to take that picture. I noticed, oh, wait, somebody has written in the chat box that tigers are like mountains. They're like a mountain god, and it is a deep part of the Korean culture. So thank you very much for sharing that. It's interesting because you know how every animal has an ally and like a mortal enemy. So I shared that I was born in the year of the monkey. And ironically, my mortal enemy is the tiger. And so during the year of the tiger, right? Yes, you're supposed to be careful during the year of the tiger. You're supposed to avoid tigers. And there is a big giant tiger on my cover of my book, which made me laugh. But again, for every mortal enemy, you also have a secret ally. And my secret ally is the snake. And that's why I surround myself with like snake jewelry and things that are snake-like, which yes, it's silly, but it's also fun. And oh, thank you for sharing that the name jar was one of your favorite books. And there's so many people I need to thank. And before I answer any more questions, I just did want to acknowledge I dedicated Once Upon an Hour to my grade 3 teacher. And that was incredibly important to me. When back in grade 3, I was an ESL student and I hated the English language. And it was my grade 3 teacher who um, convinced me that English was very, very important and was a beautiful language. It's at in June, I was really sad, right? Because the year would be coming to an end. What she did was, and I don't think we could do this now, but this was in 1977, right? She gave me her home address and said, you know what? You can practice your cursive. This is my address. Write to me. So I practiced, and that summer I wrote her my first letter in my very, very best cursive. And to my absolute surprise, she wrote back. And we kept writing back and forth. So from 1977 to today, we continue to write back and forth. We have known each other, I guess, forever, and it was because of her that, and all through the years, she kept telling me, write, and she kept encouraging me. We have remained friends, and so I ended up dedicating Once Upon an Hour to her. So that's been really, really important. Another question that I get is, what do I do if I want to write a children's book? I think there are members of my writing group in this event. Building a community for writers is extremely important. Um, I graduated in 1992, and I wanted to be a writer. And because I had an English degree, I thought I could write and I would be published and things would be awesome and wonderful. I wrote and I submitted, and nothing. I wasn't getting anywhere. I was lucky. I was working different jobs so that I wasn't relying on the writing for my income. But I kept writing and I kept submitting, and it was just rejection after rejection. Finally, in 2005, 2006, one of my students that I was working with, he asked me, what is it that you want, right? Because when I asked him, well, what is it you want, right? And I told him, you know what, I want to write, but I'm just not able to get to where I want to. So I ended up taking my first creative writing course. And I was then that I realized that writing is a skill, right? And just because you're an excellent writer does not necessarily mean that you are an excellent writer. So I started taking writing courses, and it was in a course at the continuing studies at the University of Toronto that I ran into a group of people who wanted to write just like me, and we formed a writing group. And we have been, oh my gosh, it's been 14 years. And we have supported each other throughout this journey. So I just have to give a big shout out to members of my writing group who are here today. I think it's very, very important to have a core group. You know what? My husband is awesome. He is remarkable. He is not a reader. And if I write something and I share it with friends, your friends will tell you it's great. Your family will tell you, oh, that's awesome. But you really, if you are writing to publish, you need to get critical, constructive feedback. And that is from people who are not emotionally attached to you, right? So whether or not, you form a community on your own, right? Which we ended up doing. We're called the 11th Floor Writers. We meet once a month. We workshop each other's stories. And again, they have patiently sat through, I don't know how many drafts of my children's story. Again, I think it's about 725 words. It took more than a year to write, and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And again, they sat through that, so I have to acknowledge that. The other thing too is um, it is you have to also know what your book is about and who is your reader, right? I think again that's something very, very important. I just noticed the chat message. I'm going to Yes, and somebody has shared, a Marine has shared, being part of a writing group has made all the difference in learning to write, and also, again, the ability to edit, right? So, again, it's really, really important that if you are looking to write a story, is that you get it professional edited. There's a whole process. There's a whole format to that. Again, I want to invite anybody. If you have questions about the writing process, or because at this point I've left time for a Q&A. I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Saad has written that being part of a writing group helps to alleviate the solitude of being a writer. And again, that is so spot on. Writing can be a very lonely journey. It is also, and I'll be really blunt, it can be devastating. It could be really challenging when you get rejection after rejection. I think this is especially hard for marginalized authors, racialized authors, authors that don't typically get the spotlight cast on them. For me personally, if somebody rejects a manuscript because the plot was weak or if the characters weren't interesting, then I could make that story better, right? I could work on the plot. I can work uh, on making the characters more fun. But really, if, I am told that there is no space in the Canadian literary landscape for your story because of your heritage or background, that's difficult, right? And we need to change that. So again, I think part of the reason why I'm here today is I really again want to just encourage everyone. It's the books that I shared with you on that website and all the other incredibly wonderful books that are out there. Go to the local libraries. Go to the bookstores. If the books are not there, ask the booksellers. By asking the booksellers, by asking the librarian, you are helping every marginalized author, every racialized author, because again, sales are driven by demand. And I also have to share that if you borrow books from the library, authors get credit for it. There's a program called the Public Lending Program in Canada. So if my book is in a library, for example, and you borrow it, then we are compensated for that. So don't feel that you have to go buy every book out there. If you still borrow books, ask for books, writers will be acknowledged and compensated. There is a question here about any thoughts about translating the book for an audience in Korea. That's an excellent question. So basically, my job as an author is to write the manuscript. And after I write the manuscript and I sell the manuscript, the book is the project is no longer mine. So again, I don't have a say in who gets to illustrate it. I don't get a say in because the book is out in, I think, different formats. There's an ebook, there's an audio book. All of that again gets determined by the publisher. And I would love to see the book translated. But again, and the question is in Korea. Um, a Korean publisher would then have to approach, or somebody in the publishing industry in Korea or anywhere in the world would have to approach my publisher, Orca, and then they would have to settle on some sort of royalty deal. But that again, I would have no say, and I would not be a party to that. Most of the Korean American writers are women. Oh my goodness, that's an amazing question. I did not stop to really think about that. Are there any thoughts about why? That is an excellent question. And to be honest, I'm not sure. I wonder too, though, because again, we're looking at the books for young people, young readers, and just like a lot of elementary teachers tend to be women, females, maybe, but if anyone has any thoughts on why there are more women writing for children, please put that into the chat box. I'd like to know. There's another question here. Do publishers cover fees for illustrators? So again, if you are with a traditional publisher, when you sell, the publisher should pay you. There's You should not be paying the publisher for anything, including illustration. So the publisher will pay the illustrator. They will have a separate contract for the illustrator. They will pay for the editor. pay for all the promotions and publicity. So yes, the writer, again, if you sign with a traditional publisher, should not be paying anything. They should be paid for writing the story. That's a great question. There was another question that I wanted to come back to, and it has escaped me. But oh, I was asked about the length of time, and if right now I know self-publishing is a very, very, very popular way to go. And again, it's a quicker way to bring your book to market and have it available for everyone. There are pros and cons to both. If you self-publish, you absolutely have more creative control. So, for example, the cover of Once Upon an Hour, I didn't choose the cover, right? The publisher chose the cover because, again, I love the cover of the book, but it was the fact that there's a big giant tiger, which again has always kind of scared me. It wouldn't have been my first thought to put a tiger on the cover. Again, I'm happy with that. The publishers also decide on the title, and I think a lot of people don't realize that too. So even in my novel, I did not get to choose the title of my novel. I did come up with the title Once Upon an Hour. I really, really liked the title, and again, I was just very grateful that the publisher kept the title. Another question is, how did you get inspiration when developing a character? Thank you very, very much for that question. I do know that, okay, so I know my mom is in the audience tonight. So I just wanted to again thank my mom. So I got the idea for my main character because, and I hope it's okay with my mom that I'm sharing this. Years ago, my mom got very ill. My mom had cancer, and here in Canada, she has access to um, the best medical care, right? Like medical attention. She had an incredible oncology team, and my mother is since doing great. But I wondered in ancient Korea, right? A poor child, a very sick mother, what would you do? So that's where I got the inspiration for the character. It's what would you do? And that's why, again, I had a child with a sick mother, and I wondered what would have been done back then. And I was told that most likely you would go find plants and herbs and medicinal things. So that's where the inspiration for the character came. At the time, when I was writing the book, I was working with an incredible student who did not identify with either male or female. And so she kind of inspired me to re-examine my the character in the heart of the story. So while the main character is Yuri, and again named after my daughter, the child in the story was not assigned a gender. And again, it's interesting because again, I had no intentions of making it political in any way, and but I thought it was very important that any child reading the book could identify with the character. So it's always the child. So the child can be male, female, non-binary, whatever the reader wants to make it. And this was very interesting too because in trying to sell the book, I had some editors say we need to assign, like we need, like readers will da 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 da, right? And again, this is where anyone who's writing a children's book or anyone's writing a book, you have to really kind of figure out, what do you want? What will you compromise on? What are some things that you can let go? And because I really, as you know, I'm an educator, right? I really wanted the book to be inclusive. So that was one sticking point. I refused to change that. Right. So again, I think all of these things were like little barriers along the way, right? In terms of trying to sell the manuscript. But again, Orca Books, awesome. They accepted the manuscript. I am looking at another question. Starting any writing project can be difficult, let alone a book. How did you start the manuscript and overcome that? How do I get started phase? Oh my gosh, that's an excellent, excellent question. Brainstorming. So talking with somebody. I was talking to my agent. It took so long. It's such a simple, simple story. We went through such a huge gamut and we had all these complicated ideas. How do I, what do I want to write about? And the core things that I wanted to stick to was I wanted to tell some big concept that could be different across time, across place. And I landed on time, right? Because again, we can measure time differently. And then, okay, here's time. And then where's the complication? Where's the character? And again, I landed with my mother, right? And I landed on this whole mother-child relationship. Again, I went back to my daughter, right? So then I had the central conflict, which was a sick mother and a helpless child, and a bunch of animals that didn't want to do anything. So in brainstorming on the ideas, that's how the story came to fruition. Another question. I know you mentioned being inspired by writing by your grade three teacher and started taking creative writing courses. But is there anything else that spurred you to begin your writing journey? Any turning points? Actually, there was one. I had a student in my class. I was a brand new head of special education, and I was working with a young man who had four exceptionalities. He had Tourette's, he had OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, he had ADHD, and he had a learning disability. And my job as a brand new head of special education was get him to go to his classes. And I remember meeting with him and saying, "Hey," and I have his permission to share his story. It's like, "Okay, Zach, how am I going to get you to go to class? And what do you want to do with your life?" And he basically, turned around and said, "What do you want to do with the rest of your life?" Or like, there's got to be more than just teaching, right? There's got to be more to it. And I remember feeling extremely vulnerable in that moment. And I actually was honest with him. I said, you know what? I want to write. I want to write. Not even I want to write, I want to be a published writer. And there is a distinction there because I think many of us can say, I want to write, I want to write. But again, if by saying it, I said I want to be a published writer. And then he asked me, what's stopping you? And then in my head, I was thinking, I work full time. I'm a mother. I don't have time. I've been trying since 1992. Um, and and then he said, well, if you've been trying, then, why should I try? Right? And I couldn't let this young person down. So that night I went home and I signed up for a creative writing class. It was the first creative writing class that I signed up for. I printed the receipt and I went to school the next day and said, hey, I signed up for a creative writing course. I am taking my first step and you need to go to class. Right? So we made a deal. If I write, he would go to class. And I told him, and I started going to my creative writing class. He went to his class, and every time I asked him, have you done your homework? He would say, well, have you written anything? Right? And that's how we kind of kept each other in check. I have to say, by the time he graduated high school, I had the first draft of my manuscript written. And it didn't go there. It didn't stop there because I realized that, hey, because he knew I had not published that, and I knew that he should go on to post-secondary because he's brilliant. He went on and got a kinesiology degree. This is a student that, my peers had told me would not ever graduate. He went on and got his kinesiology degree. I went on and published the novel. And his family actually invited me to his convocation at Western University, which I went to. But that was a really defining turning point for me because I he called me a hypocrite, right, for not pursuing my dream when I was asking him, or in his words, demanding that he pursue his dream, right? So thank you for that question, but that was a big defining moment for me. Another question here is, how old was this kid? Oh my gosh, you know what? The student, he was so I'm a high school teacher, right? So he was in, I guess, in his grade 11th or 12th year. It took me 5 years to write the novel. It took him 5 years to graduate high school, but we did it. And now he is actually a chiropractor, and he's doing extremely, extremely well. But again, I think there's a couple of my students here joining us tonight as well. I have to just give a huge shout out to my students. They are remarkable and they keep inspiring me, challenging me. These are incredibly interesting times, I think, for all of us to be in. So, again, when people ask me about inspiration, I often turn to my students. I'm just looking through the chat. If there's any other questions, please, please feel free to put them into the chat box. Why did you choose creative writing, particularly children's books versus nonfiction or other types of writing? So I do write short stories. I have published short stories. I have published poems. But for this particular, it was again my agent's idea, and I really did want to write the children's book more for my daughter than anything. Ideally, it would have been great if I could have published this book when, when she was a child and could have read it. By the time I published the book, my daughter was 21 years old. She is 22 years old now. So it took me 17 years, but it got done. Another question. Okay, and I have to apologize. I can't read Korean, so any messages coming in the chat box in Korean, my sincere apologies. And if you could post them in English, that would be very helpful. Um, Oh, thank you. There's comments in here that are lovely. Thank you. Another question is, what are you reading these days? So I have been trying very, very, very hard to read more books by Korean Canadian authors and by Canadian authors in general. Okay, if I could ask, please, please support your authors living in Canada. I don't know if I should even share this, but okay, maybe I will. Typically, an author will get between 5.5 to 15% royalties on a book. So if a book costs 19.99, for example, right, a 19.99 book, the writer will get between 5.5 to 15 percent of the cover price. So if you think about that, okay, and again, you can put that into the chat box. Somebody could do the math, right? It's not very much, right? But then think of this. An agent, if you have an agent will take 15% of your 5.5 to 15%. Okay, so again, anybody wants to do the math on that and put it into the chat box, okay? So if a book costs 19.99, right? And again, your royalties are between 5.5 to 15%, and then your agent takes 15% and 20% if it's actually sold in the States, right? So Canadian, and somebody did the math, and it's between $1.1 and $3. So really, and yes, somebody reminded me you get taxed on that. So authors do not make a lot of money on books. And that's why so many of us do have second or we have other careers, right? And again, that's not for everyone. You have authors like the Margaret Atwoods and other big celebrity authors who do phenomenally well. But for the vast majority of us, we are writing because we want to share our stories. We want to, yes, we want to share our stories. We want to just be part of, right, the literary landscape. So I really urge you to, again, there are so many incredible books. I wonder, actually, here's a quick activity in the chat box. Please put in names of Canadian authors that you know. Okay, so Canadian authors that you know, please put it in the chat box. I did this activity with my students at school. And again, because it's a school environment, I expected them to know all these Canadian authors. And no, it's interesting how we default back to our American authors, our British authors. Okay, Ray Robertson is an amazing Canadian author. And actually, a very quick story oh, look, there, yep, I'm getting names. Thank you. Um, yes, Robert Mudge. Oh, excellent. Yes, yes. Samantha M. Bailey. Yes. Are there any other Canadian authors? And again, you could go on to the website. Oh, Dennis Block. Yes. Kelly Dees. Oh, these are okay. And so that there's all these names coming up, right? How many of you have read the works by these authors, right? And again, if this was my class, if you were all in my class, the homework I would assign would be to go check out some of these authors. Michael Ndonchi, Catherine Grant. Oh, this is awesome. Okay. And what I might do is, you know what? I might actually create a page off my website and list some of these authors. Somebody commented on my necklace. I don't know if you could see it. It's actually my name. It's my Korean name. It's Che Yu-kyung. And it's a name that I'm trying to claim back. In the Korean culture, there's such an honorific, right? That you can't call somebody older than you by their first name. And it's interesting because now I'm at a point in my life where there's many, many people younger than me. There's a comment. I'm happy to know that there are quite a few Korean Canadian authors working here. And again, there are, but again, we have to know who they are and we have to bring them together, right? Like this, so that we could share each other's stories. Are there any other final questions before I do want to share a couple of other things before we wrap up, and we will be wrapping up by 8:15. When I was sharing the story about, please read Canadian authors, I just have to share a quick story about one of my editors, Phyllis Bruce, who is one of Canada's most iconic editors. In fact, she was made an Order of Canada for her contributions to Canadian literature and developing Canadian authors. She shared that when she was doing her master's degree at the University of Toronto, and I think this was in the 70s, she wanted to do her master's paper on a Canadian author. And she was told by her professors at the University of Toronto that there was no Canadian author worthy of a master's paper, and that she had to pick somebody British or American. And she said that blew her away. And that's why she ended up spending the rest of her life, her career, promoting and developing Canadian authors. I'm going to return to the slide deck. And again, if you have any last minute questions, please put that into the chat. On November 10th, part 2 of what we are doing tonight is called Korean Canadian Writers' Unique Voices. And joining me on the panel is my brother John. Okay, John is the author of Dark Side, which is actually a YA, young adult book that is currently being studied in schools across Canada. But we have never done a panel together. So I am absolutely thrilled that we get to talk and share and engage in a conversation about why Korean Canadian voices, stories, narratives are important to share. One of the things right now is the Korean culture is so popular, right? Even in my classes, the kids are constantly talking about K-drama, they're into the K-drama, the K-cosmetics. I work in Markham. There are so many Korean barbecues that they absolutely love. The K-cosmetics, they've got their Samsung cell phones. Right now, oh my goodness, everybody is into the Squid Game, right? So Korean culture, like everywhere. But one of the things that we want to kind of bring to the foreground is our stories, right? And the Korean Canadian experience is very different from the Korean experience. We want to tell stories about Koreans living in Canada, our unique experiences. Right now, we were very happy that CBC had Kim's Convenience, and we got, all of Canada was able to see and celebrate a Korean family, the Kim family. We have a Korean senator. Right now, we have Korean Canadian, Korean American actors. But one of the things that, we really noticed was we need more stories, right? And we need more stories about our lived experiences in in Canada. And again, if you think about the shopkeeper, the person who, works at the local variety store, who might have been a doctor back in Korea, who might have been an engineer, all the struggles in coming here, all the obstacles and barriers that, individuals, regardless of their, all of that, I kind of feel we have to capture that and share those stories. My daughter right now is 22, and one of my biggest fears was that she wouldn't know her Korean heritage. And so that's part of the reason why I'm writing my stories, my books, right? So that our experiences coming to Canada in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, all of that gets captured in our stories so that future generations can read them and can really realize that our experiences made a vital contribution to Korean Canadian history. More upcoming events during the 2021 Korea Week. So please check it out. So again, today is November 3rd, and we have talked about the children's book. Next week, we have the why we need to share the Korean Canadian unique voices. November 10 to 11, we've got the movie week. And then November 20th, hey, K-pop night. That sounds like it will be a lot of fun. So please check out those other events. There's a website link there at the bottom of the page, or you can just Google the Consulate General of Toronto, of the Republic of Korea in Toronto. Please, these are free events and they sound like a lot of fun. So before you go tonight, and again, I wanted to remind everybody that there is a survey that you will be asked to complete. So please, we value your feedback. And again, by completing the survey, there's a link to the survey in the chat box. You have a chance of winning gift cards, right? But again, your feedback will help drive programming for the upcoming events. So on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. And again, I wanted to thank the organizers and wish everyone a good night. Thank you again. Bye-bye.